Okay, let's get started. So, today I'm going to be reviewing The White Tree, Book 1 in the Cycle of Arawn by Edward W. Robertson. So, I want to start off all my reviews with a positive note. Yeah. Um. So, seriously, there are some interesting takes on magic in this book. I think that Robertson does this interesting thing with like shadow-esque magic. I don't want to give any spoilers away or anything like that, but there are some cool principles that I hope potentially later in the series get played with a little bit more. Um, but speaking on the White Tree, it's kind of limited. The main character Dante is starting to learn the system, so we as a reader are kind of getting bits and pieces here as he learns about what's going on. Yeah, I don't want to be mean, but I got a lot of criticism for this book. So I listen to a lot of my books, and I have a lot of recommendations that I go through, and this was just one that Audible had happened to recommend to me, and I picked up because I was like, I think it was on sale for like a buy two books get one credit free, and I was like, sure, I'll try it out. It's fantasy, that's the genre I'm mostly interested in, and it's never bad to try out some new writers. I found some really cool ones. I've stumbled upon Michael J. Sullivan at one point just randomly, but so I picked it up, and I've got a bunch of other books like that I'm going to go through. And when I started the book, I was really hopeful because in the first chapter, it seemed like we were going to get this really cool, interesting story. And we get a character who's thief-like, likes to sneak into places, steal, isn't really much of a direct fighter, but still can, fight a little bit here and there. And it didn't end up paying out. And for the longest time, I didn't really like. When you're going through a book, there's a lot of times where you're not really quite sure what's not sitting with you. A lot of it just felt like mediocre writing to me. Just a lot of stuff wasn't really clicking. The characters were a big thing. I think that if you do characters, you have to give them a unique voice. And with this book in particular, the two main characters, Blaze and Dante, there were times where they were going and talking back and forth to each other, and I honestly couldn't tell who was saying what. And that is a problem when you write characters. If you can't tell who's talking because they sound so similar, you need to diversify your characters a little bit more. Like, go in, work on their backstory, because the way that characters become who they are will influence how they speak. And usually you can feel that in writing. That's a lot of voice. And it's a little hard to get the handle of, but it is possible. One other big thing that I am very critical of this book for is that there are almost absolutely no stakes in this book. Some of my professors would be really excited for me to say that, but throughout the story, Dante is. I'm trying not to spoil anything for anyone in case people do want to go through it. Dante's on the run a lot of it. It's a classic, adventure type story, type fantasy-esque book where the character goes from point A to point B to point C, and they're going from town to town to town to town, but there's always like a threat chasing them. Unfortunately with this is that one of the main driving force is constant attacks on them, and that is problematic. Violence can be super impactful in stories. There's a lot of fantasy writers who do it really, really well. But the problem is if you're always relying on violence to be your conflict, it has absolutely no impact, because the characters aren't going to get hurt. They're not going to die. And that's it's a problem. And honestly, it makes me think that this was Robertson's maybe first book. I don't know if this is the first one he published or not. I'm assuming so. But there's a lot of early writing mistakes in here that I know I've made in the past with novels that I've written, where I'll follow one character and their constant threat is always this violence, but when they get into conflict, there's absolutely no stakes because we know they're not going to get hurt because we haven't done any setup for them to potentially get hurt. And as a fantasy writer, there are other stakes. I know plenty of writers who do good work with not having money. The character doesn't have any resources to work with, and they have to gather these resources. I mean, a big thing in this book could have been, it partially is, but it's not fully there, which is like gathering knowledge for this magic system and like how the character acquires it. And so I'm a little concerned that maybe the world building wasn't fully here when this book was written, and that is on the writer. But at the same time, I don't want to give him too much, flack for it. It is hard to build a fantasy world. There are a ton of steps you have to take in order to make it feel real enough that a reader isn't feeling like they're lost and confused. You have to know things, sometimes you can't share the stuff you world build with the reader because you just need to know that just in case, like, what type of export does this country have? Why? What does that influence the kingdom's production and, their commoners and stuff like that? How does that all work? How does that system function? And like, you might not use that directly in the story, but it's important for you to know as a writer, because if you don't know that, then the reader can sense and feel that. It feels like there's just a hollowness to the book. So I like to end. I want to recommend the books to, people who might like books that I'm reviewing and stuff like that. And I don't think in good conscience I can really recommend this to anyone. This is I'm going to go through the rest of the series. I still have book 2 and book 3. I got a complete trilogy of the whole cycle of Arawn, and I'm not hopeful, but I hope that it takes a turn in book 2 and book 3, and maybe it turns out to be pretty decent. Maybe he learns from his mistakes in book 1, and there's like more depth to the characters, more world building, more backstories of what's going on, more female characters, please. There's literally one female character throughout the first book, and it's but anyway, so I can't really recommend this book to a whole lot of people. It might be good if you are interested in writing, especially fantasy, and you've gone through a lot of the bigger books. Brandon Sanderson. You could potentially look to this as what you should be careful of when writing. And honestly, like, I hope Robertson, I know he has other books published, so I'm hoping that maybe some of the other ones are better and have more depth and character to them, and maybe this is just his first book. But this definitely feels like it's an early-ish book. So that's going to be it for this review. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments of whether you agree or disagree with me. I prefer you keep it pleasant, please. I will be removing comments that are unpleasant. But I want to know what other people think about if people have read it, if people haven't read it, what people think about it. and let's have a good discussion about it. And I'll see you guys next time.